Well, this is unexpected and kind of insane. Hey guys, and welcome to today's video. I don't know how many of y'all remember, but a few years ago, the US women's national soccer team had this big national outrage when they sued US Soccer, claiming that they were receiving less pay than the men's team and that they were being subjected to sexist discrimination. This was led by some of the members of the team, including everybody's favorite soccer star, Megan Rapinoe. Very outspoken, very progressive, and she really led the charge on this. And the women's national team actually sued in federal court and lost on their claim. But now, a few years later, out of nowhere, with no legal obligation to do so, US Soccer has just given them a massive settlement. US Soccer just announced a $24 million settlement with the women's team, and according to the New York Times, this is basically back pay. They're tacitly admitting that they did do discrimination, and they're compensating the women's team in retrospect. Essentially, US Soccer has caved to these claims that they successfully defeated in court, and they've also now made assurances of equal pay and equal contract structures in the future. So you might be asking, well, what's the problem with any of that? The problem is that there never actually was any sexist pay discrimination. This entire thing was baseless and rooted in spurious claims all along. So what US Soccer is doing here is caving to an outrage mob for no reason. Now, I can back up the claim that there never was any sexist pay discrimination here, but first we just have to make an honest and candid point, which is that biological men and women have some differences between them, and those manifest themselves differently in sport. So just on an objective, merit-based level, the men's team competes at a much higher athletic level than the women's team. If the two teams were to play each other in a head-to-head scrimmage, I'm almost positive the men would win and frankly blow them away. Don't believe me? Consider the fact that the US women's team lost 5-2 in a friendly scrimmage against an under 15 boys team. That's right, some of the best female soccer players in the world lost to a bunch of teenage boys. No, that's no fault of the women. They're very accomplished soccer players in their own league and in their own right. But it simply reflects the biological differences that mean men's soccer is played at a higher athletic level than women's soccer. And this is why the equal pay for equal work narrative is so deeply flawed. True equality between men and women does not mean giving them the same. It doesn't mean equal outcomes for everyone, regardless of objective merit. It means giving everyone exactly what they deserve, without bias or sexism or discrimination. And in demanding equal pay to the men, despite their objectively inferior head-to-head capabilities, the women are actually demanding the opposite. We also have to talk about the fact that men's international soccer tournaments simply draw much bigger audiences than women's. The men competed in the 2014 World Cup, for example, and the final game of that tournament drew more than 1 billion viewers. The women competed in the 2019 Women's World Cup, and the final in that competition drew about 263 million viewers. Now, to be clear, that's a ton of people. It's actually a huge sign of progress and how awesome women's soccer can be and how more people are getting into it. It's a really good number. They're doing well. They're growing. But it just shows you that, objectively speaking, there is much more demand for, interest in, and audiences tuning into the men's international tournaments. So it's not sexism that FIFA pays higher bonuses to the men's team when the commercial factors and objective audience sizes are so much bigger. Yet FIFA is an international body, and US Soccer, which is the organization the women's team sued, it's not actually clear that they ever even had a pay gap between the men and women at all. Now, the men and women do have different payment structures, where the women receive a salary and then bonuses, and the men only really received bonuses in their payment structure. But that's what the women negotiated for. And according to the Washington Post fact-checkers, after a new agreement took place in 2017, beyond that point, the men and women's team, over a typical sample of 20 games, the women would be earning anywhere between 90 and 100% of the men's compensation. Now, US Soccer provided a fact sheet where they actually showed that they paid the women more than the men. Former President Carlos Cordero wrote in the 2019 fact sheet, "Over the past decade, US Soccer has paid our women's national team more than our men's national team. From 2010 through 2018, US Soccer paid our women $34.1 million in salaries and game bonuses, and we paid our men $26.4 million, not counting the significant additional value of benefits that our women's players receive, which our men do not. Side note, after they pivoted and made this settlement, US Soccer has actually deleted that fact sheet from its website, which is sus. But a federal judge validated these claims and ruled in favor of US Soccer and against the women's national team, finding that it was not factually true that the women were getting paid less. Judge R. Gary Klossner wrote in his decision dismissing their case that the statements offered by the plaintiff, that's the women's team, are insufficient to establish a genuine dispute that female players are paid at a rate less than the rate paid to male players. The defendant, which is US Soccer, has presented evidence that the women's team is actually paid more on both a cumulative and an average per game basis than the men's team. To sum this up for you, the women's team plays at an objectively lower physical level than the men. Their international tournaments receive less viewership, and they were actually receiving arguably the same or maybe even more compensation from US Soccer. Their fake outrage equal pay lawsuit was dismissed out of court because it was silly and never rooted in any factual reality. It wasn't an example of sexist pay discrimination, it was an example of woke outrage mobs frothing at the mouth over nothing. And now, despite losing in court and having no facts to support their claims, the women's national team is getting a huge settlement and a public victory lap acknowledging their false narrative. This is utterly unwarranted, and it is more than just a waste of money. By caving to baseless feminist outrage, US Soccer is setting a dangerous precedent and telling the world that there are millions to be made by crying sexism where it doesn't actually exist. It's ceding to the dangerous idea that equality requires equal outcomes, and it's emboldening the woke mob's worst impulses. Alright guys, that's my take on this whole issue. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like this video and be sure to subscribe to my channel while you're here. Turn on bell notifications, and I will see you all in my next video.